So, the Libertarian Christian Institute wants to bring you the best minds to talk about the COVID-19 coronavirus. And it happens that our founder is actually a scientist and knows a little bit about this. Norman
Amazingly
Horn,
enough.
yeah, he actually knows and is on the front lines in some ways, which we'll talk about here. So, Norman, I mean, obviously everybody knows about this right now. So, tell us a little bit about the virus and why this is a unique problem for our society right now.
The danger here in particular, at least in my mind, is that we're in a kind of an unknown scenario comparatively to previous epidemic outbreaks,
Hmm.
where previously it was actually it's relatively simple to understand that if somebody contracted a virus or a bacterial infection of some kind that is transmissible and the symptoms show up very quickly, then you could very easily isolate that person and limit the ability of that virus to spread. And so something like SARS-1 back in the mid aughts years was pretty easy to understand in this regard. The symptoms came very quickly. They were very disastrous to the individual, and so you were able to relatively quickly tell, yep, they got it, and yep, we need to isolate. So they did that, and they were able to contain it relatively quickly. That doesn't necessarily mean mitigate the impact of it to the individual. Sometimes it's still really bad for them. That's horrible and tragic. But it allowed for a much
A faster
lesser outbreak,
response.
faster response time.
So we're
The
looking at like on the order of like 14 days for COVID-19.
Yeah, the thing, and I keep telling this to people as who are asking about this and why is this so concerning? And the difference here is that COVID-19 has roughly speaking anywhere between a 2 to 14 day lag time of asymptomatic transmissibility. In other words, that you could have it, not even necessarily know you have it, but it could be communicable to one person to another, and yet you're not going to necessarily show any symptoms that you have it.
Hmm.
So, in other words, you could, for instance, if it's entirely possible for me to have it, infect two people, and for them to infect two more people, each of them, and for each of those people to infect two more, down the line infecting 10, 20, 30, 100 people, and almost none of them would necessarily know by the end of, say, 8 to 10 days that they would all have it. And so that becomes very problematic as an epidemiological phenomenon to kind of track and understand and do even person tracing on and so on and so forth. It becomes it becomes an exponential or an arithmetically expanding problem, and that's I think the biggest troubling factor in this is that sort of
Hmm.
transmissibility issue. And then that kind of compounds itself more that if they do end up, exhibiting symptoms that require a hospitalization stay, that the moment that you're actually getting somebody into the hospital, that you're still 10 days behind the next person getting into the hospital potentially. And that could be absolutely, really, really tough to track and then develop capacity with which to handle it. And that's why
So
people
yeah,
are freaked out most of all.
yeah. So there's a lot of like speculating going on in the healthcare industry, like for the people who have to decide, like
Yeah.
who's not just like who's going to get care today, but like what are we going to expect down the road? Because we have 2 weeks to think about this, let alone react the right way.
Well, and in addition, the other question is like, who do we even test?
Yeah.
And that's actually like if there's, the response from the state thus far, I mean, it's a mixed bag of things. But one of the things that I think is arguably a little more, well, it was at least a criticism you could level accurately early on was not really coming online with testing very quickly and effectively. Now, granted, there were problems with the tests as they were, and it's been noted both from authorities and independently that it's really been the marketplace developing new tests and very quickly that is going to make the biggest difference in
Yeah.
in dealing with testing. But it's not just like an instantaneous thing. Like there's a lag time even in trying to get that online.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
we can't look and do what essentially South Korea did as quickly as they did is kind of unknown to me. I don't fully understand that at this time, but still, it's a very complicated
Yeah.
problem. Just determining even who to test is
Yeah.
is like that's a problem even right now.
We're all being told to wash our hands repeatedly
Yep.
and, stay inside. And, I saw a meme that said we're all becoming house cats. We're cleaning ourselves regularly and staying inside.
Yeah.
And so cleaning ourselves regularly, washing our hands. I mean, my goodness, we've washed our hands so many times.
Yeah.
You're in the infection control industry, and so you're on the front lines of this problem in a sort of a different way. It's not kind of, everyone's
Yeah.
talking about healthcare right now, but there's also this area as well. What has been your experience right now?
Well, in the industry I'm in, in the our corner of the business in infection control is about reducing cross contamination vectors, in particular from microelectronic objects, and we do that in three different ways. In our cases, one is that we make keyboards and mice that are waterproof and antimicrobial. And so you might imagine, I mean, we all use keyboards, right? I mean, and these things are, we joke around sometimes about, people who don't ever clean their keyboards and they're just absolutely disgusting. Well, imagine what that's like in a healthcare environment. And so one of the things we've been trying to emphasize is, hey, like you can use our technology here to, and you can spray it down with, with hospital grade disinfectants, and it will still work. Like that's the whole point. That's what we designed them to do. And so it's become we're selling these things like hotcakes now because of course, not only are we known and our company is in 80% of U.S. hospitals, just about. But now even more so, they're recognizing the need. So that's one way. Another way is we actually make an antimicrobial and chemical resistant screen protector, which is great in healthcare environments for the same reasons. You can use hospital grade disinfectants and get them taken care of. And then finally, this is where we've been seeing the biggest move or uptick in interest is in ultraviolet light disinfection of small microelectronic objects using our specially designed device. And it's a amazing piece of equipment, and it's like in UV disinfection actually is a big deal here because while it's actually we designed it with bacteria in mind, it's actually relatively easier on some level to kill viruses with UV than even bacteria. And the scientific reason for that a lot of times is the lack of a biofilm development that you get with bacteria that you do not have with viruses, which is pretty helpful. And plus, they're single-strand RNAs as opposed to dual-strand DNAs and blah blah blah. But good stuff like that. At any rate, this is an important. We're even the last couple of days, we've been fielding a lot of very interesting inquiries about the use of UV to disinfect N95 face masks, which if you've been watching the news recently, they're talking about, it's a huge shortage of them. We need millions, and the government's going to nationalize industry to try and make more. So it turns out, looks like it actually is pretty certain at this point that we'll be able to disinfect masks multiple times over using, especially our devices, without them breaking down and becoming unusable in the first place.
Well, that's good. So for Christian libertarians, I mean, we're constantly watching the news and worrying about our liberties and hoping that if we have them infringed, then we hope that they are short lived, that this will, that liberty will win out in the end. And we can be pessimistic or optimistic about that. But on the Christian side of things, this gives us an opportunity to do many things. One is things like fighting for our liberties and watching out for tyranny, but there's also personal things we can do. What are your thoughts on what should we be doing while we're stuck at home, or even not stuck at home, but like we might be active in the communities that we're in because of the the work that we do?
Sure. There's a couple things that I think come to mind immediately. One is even in the wording that you use there, even the idea that we're worrying about our liberties is something that I think that we as Christians should probably we should have the best perspective on such a thing. And the reason is that in the same way that I would say we should not panic as a result of this virus, we should not panic. We should not overreact, overreact, which I think we're kind of reaching that stage now in this country of potential actual overreaction. It's a good thing to maybe overreact a little. It's better to overreact a little and meet the need if something goes a little more wrong than you expect than to underreact and then hit and be like, oh crap, now we have a really big problem.
Yeah.
But either way, what you should not do is panic, right? One way or another, you just should not panic about it. All right. So likewise, I would say by analogy, the Christian knows that we don't need to worry. We fight for liberty because it's important and because it's right, but not because necessarily I'm just worried all the time. In fact, Jesus cautions us against worrying about tomorrow, for instance, and that excuse me, Corona. uh, you know, Jesus cautions us against being too worrisome about tomorrow. On the other hand, it's important to recognize that the reality of the situation is that there are challenges ahead, and so what we can do and what we should be doing is being that voice of reason in our communities and making sure to say like, hey, like we can still help each other. We can still be a community, even if we're having to deal with one another a little differently right now. We need to be willing to maybe take a little step out and support. Don't put especially if you're in one of the more the demographics that could be potentially more susceptible to the virus in general. If you're over 70, you're immunocompromised. You're part of underlying health issue demographic. Perhaps feel a little more exempt, but be willing to help. There are going to be people out there that are probably going to make an error in their preparation, who may need some extra help. Just be willing to do something, and don't isolate yourself. Which sounds, almost contra what the state is saying on some level. They kind of are saying on some level we should be isolating ourselves, but I don't think that's necessarily the right idea.
Yeah,
we just need to be paying attention and acting wisely, more than just shutting ourselves off for 2 weeks or whatever and not doing anything.
Yeah,
there's so much
using wisdom is really important rather than just obeying exactly what the government says or simply rejecting everything they say and just do what we want. Like using wisdom is really a key thing here.
Yeah. Look at this as, the opportunity that it is, that there are opportunities to serve, there are opportunities to make a difference, and there's opportunities to improve oneself. The word I pray that you don't lose your job. Anybody who's listening in as a result of stuff happening, and that's best wishes to everybody. But like at least with what time that we do have, where we're not working or we've got extra ability to just be at home and not be about other businesses. Make use of that time, and even take the words of Ephesians 5 to mind and redeem that time best you can. Use it to improve yourself. Use it to study the Word. Use it to learn something new. There's so many ways in which we can make use of this time and not let it go to waste. Let's not it does seem kind of silly to think that if all we do during this time is just catch up on binge watching Netflix or something, that I feel like that will have been a total waste.
Yeah. Well, those things are good, but yeah, you're right. They we have a responsibility to our families, to our neighbors, and those around us. So yeah, those are all good things. And thanks, Norman, for doing this.
Yeah, my pleasure. And if anybody wants to talk about it, let me know, and I'll be willing to help.